CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Vote counting underway following Guinea's presidential election. The United Nations-led Libyan political and military talks is set to resume in Geneva. And global coronavirus cases approach the 40 million mark as countries report sharp increases in infections. Pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. I'm Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Also ahead on the program, there are rising concerns that Ghana may be unable to pay its growing debt, currently at 68% of GDP. And Nigerian boxing welterweight champion Abdulhafez Osoba eyes the Tokyo 2020 Olympic gold. And we begin with development in Guinea, where vote counting is currently underway following the presidential election. 12 candidates are vying for the highest office, but only the incumbent Alpha Condé and opposition leader Cello Dalein Diallo are said to be in with a chance of victory. CGTN's Wanja Mungai tells us more.
Vote counting began immediately polls closed late on Sunday. Some 5.4 million people were registered to vote. The electoral body has described the process as largely peaceful.
We have not experienced any major anomalies in all polling stations under my responsibility. I appeal to the people of Guinea to be peaceful and wait for the results. I sincerely hope that everyone accepts the results that will be given.
Here we observed everything was normal. They opened the polling station at 7:15 a.m. I checked all the material here and everything was there at the opening.
Initial results are not expected for several days. A run of vote is scheduled for November 24th if none of the candidates garners the required 50% of the vote. 12 candidates are running for president, but only two, the incumbent Alpha Condé and longtime rival Cello Dalein Diallo, stand a chance. Condé has beaten Diallo twice before at the ballot.
If the election happens in the best of conditions, there will be a winner that everyone will accept. No one will make war over it. We should know that it's the will of God.
Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
Well, Guinea's vote marks the start of a busy electoral cycle across West Africa, with polls also due in Côte d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, Ghana and Niger. In Côte d'Ivoire, the opposition insists it will boycott the October 31st election, and President Alassane Ouattara has rejected a proposal to postpone the polls. In the meantime, the regional body ECOWAS is trying to mediate an end to that dispute. Its delegation has met two main opposition leaders, Henry Konan Bedie and Pascal Affi N'Guessan. The ECOWAS team will also meet other candidates, including Ouattara, before issuing a final statement.
The demands we made to the ECOWAS ministerial mission are the same. They are the reform of the Independent Electoral Commission, the Constitutional Council, the participation of candidates not selected for the presidential election, and also the withdrawal of the candidacy of President Alassane Ouattara and the audit of the electoral list. We are confident and trust ECOWAS.
The United Nations is set to begin direct face-to-face talks between delegations of the 5+5 Joint Military Commission in Geneva. The acting special representative of the Secretary General and the head of the UN Stabilization Mission in Libya, Stephanie Williams, will be convening the talks. The United Nations is seeking a complete stand-down of all military aggression to enable an agreement on a lasting ceasefire, including a demilitarized zone in central Libya. While staying in Libya, representatives of Libyan tribes and politicians are meeting in Sirte to build up on the agreements reached in Egypt and Morocco's talks. CGTN's Adel Mahroui joins us now from Cairo with the latest. Adel, can you give us more details on those talks?
So the CERT meetings have started on Saturday, and they basically focus to unify the stances politically among Libyan tribes and politicians to try to reach consensus on hanging issues, arguments, and remaining points that are critical to the political process, but at the same time, Libyans have been quite divided about it. Now, so far it seems that the dominant participation comes from Eastern Libya. There have been some representation from Western side, so the meetings have not yet produced or shown to be inclusive in terms of political and tribal representation. Still, it is quite a significant move as Libyans are trying to build up on the international talks that have been ongoing. You've mentioned the 5+5 military talks in Geneva. This is one of the examples that the process itself has been building up on talks for military talks that have been held in Cairo and in Hurghada, Egypt. These are talks that has seen the opening of the airspace within Libyan cities, and we've witnessed the first flight between the eastern and western rival blocks for the first time last Friday. So this is the similar process that is ongoing that helps for the UN-led talk to, when it starts to have some agreements before or preceding these meetings, and at the same time the UN talks will not be investigating hanging issues all the way from the beginning. There will be at least some efforts exerted before it to help the United Nations reach to a final agreement between all Libyan rivals.
So Adel, the UN will not be investigating hanging issues, and this meeting is now expected to finalize those hanging issues ahead of the UN talks scheduled for next week. What are those hanging issues?
So the prime hanging issue now will be the interim government and the leadership, the transit leadership of Libya. There has been an initial agreement to make this government, the unity government and the transitional bodies that will be leading Libya for 18 months to be based in Sirte. Sirte is where the decisive line or the dividing line between both the eastern and western forces lie. There's been an agreement by the government of National Accord and the parliament to make Sirte the headquarters of the transition. However, there are differences like who will be guarding these interim governments. Will it be the LNA forces or the militias allied to the government of National Accord, or a new security device? And this is the main still hanging issue between both rival parties, is what will be the form of the security body, the army and the police that will be leading the entire country. Because General Khalifa Haftar, as he is the head and with his military background in the Libyan army, he represents the Eastern Bloc. But that has been quite a critical issue for the Western side, who needs to have their own representation. Haftar has been insisting that the militias should disarm, but how will they be included in the military forces is another hanging issue. Right. And it's basically the division of the positions among the Libyan factions. That's mainly what people are trying to agree on and give support to the transition government that will lead to general elections.
Adel Mahroui joining us there with the latest on Libya, joining us from Cairo. Thank you. Now, global coronavirus cases are approaching the 40 million mark as countries report sharp rises in infections. Italy registered more than 10,000 confirmed cases on Sunday, a record high for its daily count. France has reported nearly 30,000 new infections. The virus is spreading among the elderly at an increasing speed, and cases in Britain have surpassed 720,000. A government advisor says the nation needs a 3-week lockdown to stop the spiral. Well, South Africa's Health Minister Zweli Mkhize and his wife have tested positive for COVID-19. Mkhize was tested on Saturday after showing mild symptoms. Mkhize has been at the forefront of South Africa's fight to contain the pandemic. The health minister is urging citizens to continue adhering to health protocols by wearing masks, sanitizing correctly, and maintaining social distancing. The number of coronavirus cases in South Africa has surpassed 700,000. The government fears a second wave of infections would worsen the current economic recession. Meanwhile, the Kenyan government is warning of a potential second wave of the coronavirus pandemic following a steady rise in COVID-19 cases. The government says the current infection rate has risen to 12% per day from the 1% infection rate recorded from the 1st of October. Hundreds of people living in the country's capital, Nairobi, have turned up in numbers for a two-day COVID-19 mass testing exercise targeted at helping to break the chain of coronavirus transmission. CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa tells us more.
They waited patiently in the queue that wound its way across the yard, waiting to get to the health worker tucked behind a pillar. For a second consecutive day, the Nairobi Metropolitan Services set up COVID-19 testing stations in 17 sub-counties across the capital city, aiming to screen at least 6,000 people. In Kibra, a densely populated area, the trickle of people turned into a steady flow as the day progressed. Their reasons for being here were different. Zaitun Musa had traveled to Kenya from her native Uganda in March to attend a funeral. Now she needed a valid COVID-19 certificate to travel back.
I worry that without a COVID-19 certificate, I will not be allowed to travel back home. I hope now they will allow me to cross the border.
While Daniel Wekesa sought the certificate that would allow him to get back to work.
I came because at my place of work, we have been asked to take the test so that we all know our status.
Despite the fact that the tests were administered free of charge, others, however, chose to stay away, anxious about the process. Nairobi undertook a similar exercise in May, where close to 3,000 city residents were tested for the virus. Though the cases appear to be reducing, there has been a recent surge in the number of COVID-19 infections in the country. On Sunday, the country registered 685 more infections, bringing its total COVID-19 cases to 44,881. This after the government eased restrictions in the country, reopening bars and extending curfew hours.
We are not yet off the hook. The curve has not yet flattened. Actually, in the last few days, it has been going up. And this shows that there is need to do something more. And that is why we are mobilizing people to come for the testing, because knowing your status is very important. It will help in breaking the chain of transmission.
The surge comes even as schools reopen, with only Standard 4, Standard 8 and Form 4 students required to report to school for now. However, a steep rise in COVID-19 infections could roll back some of these gains.
Scientists hold that this mass testing exercise is important as it helps to assess Nairobi's disease burden. And once the authorities have the full picture, they can then put in place measures to help contain the spread of the disease. Wilkista Nyabwa, CGTN in Nairobi, Kenya.
In Nigeria, the Lagos state government has ordered schools to reopen by Monday. This follows a directive in October to have final year students back in the learning institutions. Education had been on hold since the country was locked down in March due to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, recent reports that over 180 students and teachers at a private school had been infected have worried many. State officials say some of them have mild symptoms and no one has been hospitalized. Let's cross over to CGTN's Phil Ihaza. He's joining us from Nigeria. Phil, can you give us more details on those students and teachers that tested positive for the coronavirus? 180 of them, despite none being hospitalized so far.
Thank you, Beatrice. So the Lagos State Commissioner for Health, Akin Abayomi, has stated that the total number of 441 students and staff, out of those numbers, 181 to be precise, have been tested positive for the coronavirus disease. It all started when an SS1 student, a senior secondary student, age 14, a female, had mild symptoms. She was treated with first aid, but subsequently tested positive. And then, of course, 181 students turned out positive after all. But the good news is that they're asymptomatic. They're not showing any signs of illness or serious signs of COVID-19 at the moment, and they've been isolating at the school premises. The school is on the island in Lagos State, southwest Nigeria. So they've been, being isolated in the school premises. Health officials have been visiting the premises every now and then to provide COVID-19 health care kits and also further support for the school authorities. So they are expected, of course, to isolate for another 14 days and then conduct another test for the entire school, the students and staff, to see how well they're doing. But for now, there's no source of panic to say for that school and, of course, people around. It's just periodic warnings for them to maintain hygiene, you know, and all of that to ensure there's no further outbreak of the disease.
Well, Lagos state government had indicated that schools were to resume by Monday. So this new development, though, what does this mean for the students who are due to return to school?
Well, what the worry or concern is now with this kind of development is the fact that many parents who are supposed to resume, especially from today, Monday, with the government's, you know, instruction, is that there's more worry, there's more concern for parents and guardians who would have easily released their students, hoping that the COVID-19 pandemic has been either reduced to a drastic minimum or proper health guidelines, protocols, and equipment have been put in place. You know, before now, parents have also been worried, and guardians. Many of them have stuck to the virtual learning process, which they've been on since the outbreak began in March, or the lockdown rather, in March. So they've been having to do virtual learning, online classes, and many of them have insisted that they'll wait until there's a vaccine out, maybe next year or thereabout. But for many other parents now, they are more concerned, especially the ones that cannot afford the tools for virtual learning or online learning classes, and they will have to take the risk to send their children back to school, especially if the children are in public schools, because you find out that in private schools you see more of those, you know, personal equipment kits, health guidelines really put in place, but a few other public schools are yet still not as developed, or they've not put those kind of facilities in place as we've seen in many cases. So that's the only worry for them, but they will have to just ensure that their students follow the proper health guidelines, you know, go with their face masks, go with their sanitizers. The school authorities too will have to work closely with the health officials to ensure that periodic hygiene protocols are put in place to reduce this kind of menace, you know, across the country. All
right, Philly Hazard joining us there from Lagos. Thank you. You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. Villagers in Egypt in mourning after a boat carrying 37 people capsizes.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has gone on television to introduce new measures to try to stem the rise in COVID-19 infections. Our correspondent Alex Fraser reports from Milan.
Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte addressed Italians on TV on Sunday evening. Wearing a mask, he introduced new measures to try to stem the rise in COVID-19 infections. Bars and restaurants must close by midnight and can only operate with table service. Local government will have the power to shut down public streets from 9 o'clock in the evening to prevent large gatherings, and schools and universities have been urged to stagger their start times. He told Italians that everyone must do their part to save the country's health and economy. Daily new cases of the virus have doubled since last week in Italy. 69 more people have died in the last 24 hours. On Sunday, there are 11,705 new cases, the highest daily number recorded here since the start of the pandemic. These numbers are higher than March, when northern Italy was the virus epicenter in Europe. Although that sounds bad, testing capacity has increased in Italy, and each day around 5 times as many tests are being carried out now than during the March-April peak. However, there are concerning developments. On Sunday, 750 people were in intensive care with COVID-19 and more than 7,000 were hospitalised, according to the Health Ministry. Again, Lombardy has the most cases in Italy. There were almost 3,000 new cases on Sunday. More than half of those are here in Milan. Thousands of lives have already been lost in the region this year. Increasing rates of infection are troubling for those that live here. Alex Fraser, CGTN, Milan.
Health professionals around the world have been commemorating World Hospice and Palliative Care Day during the month of October. They hope to raise awareness about the need to provide quality health care for patients facing the end of their lives. Doctors, nurses and other healthcare professionals in and around Cape Town marked the day with a candlelight ceremony and a discussion on the importance of palliative care. Renee Delcam has more.
They gathered to remember patients who had died of COVID-19 and other complex and chronic conditions. But healthcare professionals say hospice and palliative care is more about living than about dying.
Death is but a mere second, and life is everything up until that point. So our aim and objective is to actually empower patients to live their life to the full.
Palliative care is the care that we can give to somebody who has a life-threatening condition from which they most likely will die. It's the care of the patient and their family through the process of their journey with the disease into bereavement.
Hospice or palliative care is the holistic care of patients, including bio, psycho, social and spiritual care. And according to South Africa's national policy on palliative care, an estimated 50% of all people who die in South Africa could benefit from such health care.
Palliative care doctors and nurses say while they cannot control the outcome for terminally ill patients, they are determined to ensure that patients experience as much dignity as possible as they live their lives to the end.
As doctors and nurses, we can't save everybody. There are some conditions from which a person will die, and no matter what we do, they will die. But we can change how we look after them. We can change their last few days and months of their life to make their quality of life better, so that they don't die a horrid death, a horrid, painful, undignified death.
Keith Griffiths says he was devastated when his 55-year-old wife, Harriet, was diagnosed with a brain tumor. She was given 6 to 9 months to live, but died a few weeks later. He says it was the care and compassion of doctors, nurses and volunteers that helped his family cope. But palliative care doctors say the COVID-19 pandemic created many serious challenges.
With COVID, no visiting was allowed. You could not create a family-doctor bond. I mean, when we started off admitting patients with COVID, we were so scared of the doctors of contracting COVID that we would stand more than 2 meters from the edge of the bed.
Doctors are now relying more on technology such as teleconferencing and texting to keep families in touch with their loved ones throughout their end-of-life journey. Renee Delcam, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
For many people in Africa, migration offers hope of a brighter future for those who risk it all to rich countries with better economic opportunity. However, these journeys can often lead to tragedies. One village in Egypt called Damashan is in mourning after a boat carrying 37 people from the area capsized. Only 20 of them survived. And as CGTN's Adel Mahroui tells us, the village has been losing dozens of its residents each year as they attempt to cross the Mediterranean Sea into Europe.
Dahmasha is a village that has been mourning for several years now. News about young men in their 20s dying has become common. Dozens of villagers here drown every year on their way to illegally cross the Mediterranean to Europe.
There is an entire generation who traveled to Europe 30 to 40 years ago. They were successful, some established businesses. These people have become role models for the young in Dahmasha and many Egyptian villages. So even before reaching high school, the young here dream about their trip to Europe.
Member of Parliament Sahara Etman is campaigning for her second term in the House of Representatives. A moment of silence and prayers precedes her speech in honor of the 17 Egyptians who recently drowned or remain missing. 37 people from this village were on the same boat that sank on its way from Libya to Italy.
For 2 years, my son has been nagging me about taking the trip to Europe, and despite my objections, he approached the traffickers. They took him to Libya and from there to Italy. They told me that my son made it to Italy. A couple of days later, I learned that his boat had sunk.
My son had a job in Libya, but when his friends here who were on their way to Italy talked to him, he insisted on joining them. Life is expensive and the cost of living is always increasing, so I borrowed money from a lot of people to help him travel.
After the campaign, they approached their MP to follow on the efforts she's been leading with the Foreign Ministry to bring the 20 survivors back home. Families in this impoverished village get indebted to pay some $4,800 per person trafficked. It's a gamble that would likely only get paid once their son reaches Italy and gets a job. The 20 survivors of this incident are being held in detention centers in El Zawiya in Libya. Most of these families have either lost a member of their household or are in huge debt which they cannot afford to repay. And the cycle of migration and subsequent tragedies never stops. Days after this tragic incident, Etman received the saddening news about a sunken boat in Libya carrying another 29 Egyptians.
I've been analyzing this phenomenon as a member of parliament and have been trying to introduce solutions. We are trying to create jobs for these young men. We're also trying to legalize the travel process so they don't need to take such a dangerous trip.
Etman is trying to allocate microloans and professional support to help locals establish small enterprises. Employment opportunities here in Dahmasha would help save many lives. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, El Dahmasha village in Sharqiya, Egypt.
Tanzania's energy regulator says the use of liquefied petroleum gas, popularly known as cooking gas, has increased by 16% in the last 1 year. While Tanzanian gas is relatively cheaper compared to that sold in Kenya and Uganda, many Tanzanians still cannot afford to buy it, forcing them to resort to unclean sources of energy. CGTN's Isaac Lukando has more.
Gas consumption in Tanzania is on the rise, but Mwanakombo Mohammed, a food vendor in Dar es Salaam, cannot afford to use it. She says charcoal is her only option.
It's easier to use charcoal than gas because charcoal is cheaper than gas. But it would be better for me to use gas because gas simplifies things. You cook faster and it's cleaner.
Retailing at around $7 for a 6-kilogram cylinder, Tanzanian gas is among the cheapest in East Africa. This vendor says lowering the price even further will help drive up sales.
Gas usage can increase if the government plays its part in lowering prices for Tanzanians. If there are costs that fall on the big distributors or importers, lowering them would help decrease the burden for buyers, because our prices depend on the prices we get from them.
There are more than 10 companies dealing in liquefied petroleum gas in the country. They imported 166,000 metric tons of gas in 2019 compared to 142,000 a year before.
According to the Ministry of Energy and Minerals, charcoal consumption in Dar es Salaam is equivalent to destroying 1,000 football fields of trees a day. The government hopes the increase in the use of cooking gas will not only provide a reliable source of energy for the city's 6 million residents, but will also reverse this trend.
Alongside the use of gas, alternatives to charcoal are also on the rise. This environmentalist and author says such energy sources will help save the environment.
More than 8 tons of alternative charcoal
are being used daily in Dar es Salaam. This is a good step towards curbing the use of energy sources that hurt the environment, especially those that involve the cutting of trees.
Around 7% of Tanzanians are currently using cooking gas. Tanzania's government says it plans to raise this number to 50% in the next few years and hopefully save the environment in the process. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Your business news is now coming up next. Here's what's ahead. Concerns raised that Ghana may be unable to pay its growing debt. And Netflix grants African content access to its global platform.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
According to the World Bank, the risk that Ghana may be unable to pay its debt is growing. The country's debt hit $45.4 billion, about 68% of GDP in July. Economists say the coronavirus pandemic has partly contributed to the increase in debt, as the country borrowed more this year to reduce the impact of the pandemic. CGTN's Nabel Ahmed Rubai reports from Accra.
Ghana's tax revenues took a nosedive when it went into lockdown in March due to the coronavirus pandemic, falling by 26% in the first half of the year. The shortfall meant the government had to borrow more to fund unplanned spending, especially within the health sector.
Expenditure on infrastructure has been going down in the country. It means the amounts of money the country has been borrowing is not being spent on infrastructure, which will expand the productive base of the country. But they are going into social intervention programs, things that may be of benefit to the poor in the short term, but it is not reflecting in the growth potential of the country. And for that matter, repaying these amounts of monies you have borrowed is becoming very difficult.
Ghana's debt jumped to $45.4 billion in July from $37.6 billion last year. The government says the increase is mainly due to the borrowing of $3 billion from the international market, coupled with the effect of COVID-19 and the weakening cedi against the US dollar. Ghana has lifted lockdown restrictions and the economy has begun to bounce back. The IMF says the economy will grow by 0.9% by the end of this year. But economists want the government to do more in raising internal revenue, especially from the country's natural resources like oil, so it can reduce its borrowing.
The country is just not generating enough. And I keep on saying, you cannot tax poor people and be able to raise so much revenue to develop your country. You need to be able to generate so much from your natural resource endowment. And the country is not doing well in that regards. The government of this country, the people of this country have to sit down and look at what is going wrong over there in the extractive sector.
While the country struggles to pay its debt, economists want the government to seek debt relief from their creditors.
That is already being considered. Ghana's finance minister has called on private sector creditors to also join an extended G20 debt service suspension initiative that allows participating nations to delay payments. The initiative has since April deferred at least $5 billion of debt for more than 40 developing countries.
For now, it's uncertain if Ghana will get some debt relief from its creditors, but the World Bank has urged African countries, including Ghana, to rein in spending and increase tax revenues to avoid defaulting on their debt. Nawel Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Subscriptions across all telecommunications networks in Nigeria have maintained a steady growth pattern, reaching a record high of 203 million subscribers. This is the first time subscribers have soared past the 200 million base as the industry shrugged off the economic downturn caused by the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. From Abuja, here's Kelechi Mekalam with the details.
Favor Ubong retails telecom products and services in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Her services include the sale of SIM cards, data and internet devices. She had considered exploring the option of a more profit-making venture, but not anymore. Favor has been raking in good profits since the COVID-19 lockdown.
There was increase in demand and increase in supply in our business. Previous months before the lockdown, they just say maybe we are buying stock, maybe like 200 stock. But during the lockdown, we were opportune to have more than 200 because there was increased demand of the internet service, all the network.
Nigeria's telecoms industry has retained resilient growth despite the coronavirus pandemic. Network subscription reached an all-time high of 203.5 million subscribers. Data from Nigeria's Communications Commission revealed that 4.2 million new telephone lines were connected. This is as entrepreneurs, institutions and individuals switched online to maintain their businesses during the lockdown.
A lot of youths in Nigeria, and even the elderly ones now, are all present online. A lot of people now have multiple SIMs, and most of them are subscribed, so it's not surprising to see increments in telecommunication subscriptions these days. Of course, it has affected the Nigerian economy positively in the sense that a lot of entrepreneurs spring up. A lot of people came to understand, of course, there are a lot of things you can do from home, and a lot of investors invested largely into home-based and online-based businesses. Entrepreneurs are now finding more flexible ways of doing business. There's more job opportunities for people.
Since the early 2000s, the industry has maintained a steady growth pattern in Nigeria. The Bureau of Statistics report shows an 18.10% growth in the second quarter of 2020. With subscribers soaring above the 200 million base, industry watchers believe the sector holds great potential to power Nigeria's economy upwards. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Let's now head to Ethiopia, which is largely known as the birthplace of coffee Arabica and one of the world's biggest producers and exporters as well. The country's coffee exporters seem to have little to no complaints about the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the booming industry. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
Almost everywhere in the world and for most people in different countries, the morning coffee is an important day starter. Well, I think I'm one of those people. And in here, what I have is one of the world's finest Arabica coffee. Strong, aromatic, and exciting. Ethiopia's coffee is famous worldwide, and export destinations include Middle East, China, Japan, most of Europe, and the United States. And thanks to the Ethiopian Commodity Exchange, coffee trading has become up-to-date, transparent, and quick. It's also helping small-scale coffee growers benefit more.
We are not only exporters of coffee, we are farmers too. Our company alone has from 300 to 400 outgrowers. Besides that, we buy quality coffee with fair price from the Ethiopian Commodity Exchange. Specialty, organic and certified coffee is available for export for the world market. The ECX platform benefits both the coffee growers and exporters equally.
In 2018-2019, Ethiopian exports are believed to have reached 3.98 million bags of coffee. That is 238.8 metric tons, making it the most important African coffee exporter and the 10th largest exporter in the world. And so the government has given due attention for its development. Experts say the all-rounded work from coffee bush to market has paid off.
We used to stop work during the rainy season, but this year we have even strengthened our export capacity. The coordinated work has even made the coffee export remain the leading commodity to still deliver higher results.
Ethiopia's coffee exports are highly supported by Ethiopian Airlines. Africa's largest and most profitable airline has made logistics services easier for coffee producers. And that has helped Ethiopia beat even Brazilian counterparts during these corona pandemic times.
Generally, when coffee exporting countries like Brazil are highly affected by the coronavirus, we have used the market advantage pretty well. The product movement has been assured by our very own airliner too. Therefore, global customers have increased their ties with us for their coffee demands to be met.
According to available data, Ethiopia's coffee domestic demand in Africa's top coffee consumer is expected to remain robust. Ethiopian coffee consumption expected to rise by 2.4% in 2019-2020. Grumtara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Let's now head to the movies. And African filmmakers are now enjoying international success. This comes after Netflix began streaming more content produced on the continent. Take a look.
Is there any news on the gang's whereabouts?
No, Nick, it's your job to tell us.
The Kenyan-made film Poacher is now on Netflix. It's a dramatic portrayal of the poaching situation in the East African nation. For the producers, it did not come easy.
So this has really been a process for us. It took about 2 years from initial writing to actually starting shooting, and then another 2 years to get it onto Netflix. Raising money, we begged, borrowed, and almost stole. We went the crowdfunder route.
The film departs from the normal documentary format but has been used to tackle the grim realities posed by the illegal activity. However, it's not just the approach that differs. It's the milestones that the producers have achieved of having their content on the world's largest streaming platform.
That's very exciting. It's also a bit nerve-wracking, seeing as Netflix is the biggest platform for online streaming content. So we're just looking forward to seeing how people will respond to it. And hopefully we'll take a few more steps towards actualizing the whole vision of Poacher.
Let's see how you perform this night now.
Another film from Nigeria, Olutere, is also telling the African story. It's based on a journalist whose life unravels after she goes undercover as a sex worker.
A madam who takes people to Europe.
She's drugged and later raped by a respected businessman and philanthropist. The film seeks to highlight the realities of women who are lured and later trafficked into prostitution overseas.
Everything that has happened.
And I feel like people need to see how these things happen so that we can help do something about it, so that we can help stop it, whether it's trying to help young women, trying to empower young women to find other ways and other solutions to figuring out their lives rather than going on this horrible journey.
Unlike most Nigerian films that are soap opera based with lavish sets, this film was shot in the dark streets of Lagos. these are not the only African movies blazing the trail on Netflix. In June, a romantic comedy titled Cook Off from Zimbabwe also streamed on Netflix. Hollywood has been blamed for stereotyping Africa, and the rise of African content on the global platforms seeks to end the simplistic portrayal of Africa by foreigners, who may not have a deeper understanding on issues affecting the continent. Robert Magilla, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's now take a look at what's coming up in the next segment of our program. Take a look. Namibian authorities raised concern following deaths of over 5,000 seal pups at a local beach.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
Namibian authorities have raised concern following the deaths of more than 5,000 seal pups on a local beach. The country's fisheries ministry and several marine conservation groups have launched investigations seeking to establish the cause of those deaths. CGTN's Angelo Coppola has more.
The pups were found at Pelican Point near the port of Walvis Bay. They were born prematurely and died almost immediately, according to Nordia Dreyer, a marine biologist at Ocean Conservation Namibia. He's working with Dr. Simon Alwyn and Dr. Tess Gridley from the Namibian Dolphin Project.
We're currently trying to get better information on the numbers of females affected. And for that information, we need to do things like drone footage and then also very detailed sampling of these aborted fetuses to really get information on the cause of this event.
At the moment, the incident looks like it's been contained to Pelican Point.
However, we are concerned about reports of very thin females and dying females further north. And obviously we are concerned about the potential for this to be wider spread. So it does need to be very carefully monitored at the other colonies in Namibia to really get a feeling for that.
The colonies in the country are entering their pupping high season, so getting test results in good time is crucial. But the COVID-19 pandemic is hampering efforts to get those tests done urgently.
That does require working with pathologists in Pretoria, and that will require samples to be moved from one country to next, which does take a little bit longer to do.
There are longer-term implications that the experts are also concerned about.
If you do have a mass die-off this year, then there can be longer scale implications for the colony affected, which currently is mostly Pelican Point. Because obviously then you don't have animals going into that, recruited into the population, and then in years to come you're also going to have a decrease or an affected population because of this event.
Authorities and conservation groups are getting increasingly anxious as we get to the high point of the pupping season. It's time that we get those results in so we can find out what the problem is. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And your sports news is coming up next. Here's what's ahead. Nigerian boxing welterweight champion